Hi, y'all. We're excited to have you here and wanted to welcome you to Flatiron School's Coding for Beginners, Intro to APIs using JavaScript. My name is Corey Mickelson, and I am the Marketing Events Coordinator here with Flatiron School. A big part of my job is hosting free introductory workshops like this evening's event to give you all an opportunity to meet some of our instructors and get a better feel for how the Flatiron School experience is. As a reminder, we're all here to learn something and have a good time, so let's remember to be kind and courteous to one another. Quick little reminder, we're going to be using the chat as our main source of communication, so make sure that little blue button is set from host and panelist to everyone so we can all chat together. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce our host for the evening, Phil Roth. He is one of our lead software engineering instructors. Go ahead and take it away, Phil.
All right, how are we doing? Cool. So first off, just wanted to do a little bit of an introduction here. So I am Phil Roth, the lead software engineering instructor here at Flatiron. I actually was a student as well. I used to be an industrial engineer before kind of going through a career change or refocusing into software engineering. Took the immersive program in Chicago, and that was an amazing time. Moved. I used to live in Michigan, and I moved to Chicago for the program, and now I am living out in Monterey. So going all over the country, doing a bunch of Flatiron and software engineering things. I've taught at all levels of software engineering here at Flatiron. All the way from before we had just our online and in person, and then we have now Flex and live, and right now I am currently in teaching the live programs. Some background about me, other than like software engineering, I have background in music. I've been writing music since early high school, all the way from just like, writing, band, like 4-piece band, like rock band, all the way to like some, orchestral, marching band stuff, into electronic music and DJing. So I still do that on the side. Love play, I still love playing, tons of different instruments. Those are just a couple: trumpet, guitar, drums, keyboard, and all that fun stuff. And so I've definitely put a lot of my music background and industrial engineering background into my software engineering stuff. So that was really cool. I bet, I know a lot of you guys, a lot of us here, probably are coming from another field. So it's great to be able to still utilize it. It's not like you're starting from square one. We're just starting from a different location. Yeah, so I'm excited to talk with everyone about APIs. APIs, especially with JavaScript, but the nice thing about this is it's kind of language agnostic. So we're going to be dealing with our APIs in JavaScript, but all this stuff we're going to talk about can actually be applied to basically every other language. It just kind of looks a little different. So here's what we're going to go over today. We're just going to have a discussion about APIs, the request response cycle, what is an API, and how to use the fetch method, which is JavaScript's way of communicating with an API. Then at the end, we're going to actually build out a single page application, sometimes abbreviated as SPA or SPA, for a random fact generator that makes a GET request to an API and manipulates the DOM, the document object model, with a response from the request. So we are going to be communicating with some external or third party, or some data set that we have no control over, and we're going to send a request, get that response, and actually utilize that data locally in our own code. So that's what we're going to be doing today. So first off, what is an API? So an API stands for Application Programming Interface. It is kind of a general, catch-all term for any sort of external data that we may have control over it, but it's just an external data source. So a lot of times we want, a way to kind of conceptualize this is using this this kind of a restaurant model. You'll see this all over the place, and understanding what APIs are and how there's a lot of stuff in code that we try to turn it in, and we try to make different comparisons to real world things that already take place. So an API, the API itself is like a menu at a restaurant that lists all the available dishes with an item description. So that's just like looking at the menu. That's all the things that this thing can do. You can order a cheeseburger. You can order a pizza. You can do all these things. You can change things around. And the request is what happens when you tell your waiter. So you tell your waiter, I want this. I want a burger. I want a burger without cheese. That's you giving your waiter or the request all the things that you want. The waiter or the API is what's going to take all the information that the user, customer, client, app, all of those things, and it's going to put it in a way that the kitchen or the server and database can understand. So for me, if I am the customer and I tell the waiter something, it's kind of like that of burger with cheese, and then they say, oh, I want like a cow, flip it, put some walk it through the oven, all that fun stuff. It's interpreting it in a way that the kitchen can understand. So that's what happens here. Is a request is made for an option, and the kitchen prepares and delivers the final product. So simply put, an API is a software with protocols and procedures to send data back and forth between two separate computers, with a web page or an app and a user. So what those two computers are, at this point, there's more than two computers, but to conceptualize it, there are two computers. One is your computer that you are sitting at. This is the client. This is the app. This is the customer. And then the server or the kitchen or the database, that is somewhere else. That is, that's like Facebook servers or Facebook's database or Twitter's database or Yelp's database. But that's somewhere else, or you could be in charge of it, but it is somewhere else. And there are many third-party APIs available. There's so many that are out, and obviously there's different ways of communicating with them. Each API is different because it depends on how whoever's owns that API, however they structure their data. So the thing about APIs is you have to essentially learn what that API, how that API functions. It's like if you went from one restaurant to another and you were still a server, but then the kitchen, obviously the menus are slightly different, and the way that you communicate with the kitchen is slightly different. So you have to learn those APIs, those databases for each individual API. And that's a huge part of communicating with APIs. There's not one catch-all thing to do, because the term API is kind of a little broad. It's just a way of communicating with an external database. All right. Yeah, and that's what we want to do here. And that's what we're going to focus on for today. So for the example, for Facebook, this is, just a regular website that most of us use. I haven't been on it in a while, but my family's on it, so I can't get rid of it. So Facebook. So when a user logs into Facebook, all this information, and it keeps growing and growing. There's so much information all over here. We've got a sidebar on the left, which has all these tabs and all these links that we can click on, shortcuts. We have this middle section, which is all the posts from your friends from now back into the beginning of time. There is the right, there's all this other stuff, all these settings that we can deal with, and all the things that exist on this web page are actually just a visual representation for you, the client, of what Facebook has on their database. So what's happening is we, the user, are sending a request to facebook.com/ for this case, Josephine, and we are getting a response from Facebook of all of this data. Then the client, the actual web page, Chrome, Firefox, whatever, interprets that and shows it to us. So that's what's happening on every single web page that we get. Every time we open up a new tab, if we go to google.com, it's just sending a request to Google and we're getting a response. Oh, thank you. We're getting a response to that's going to display what we have here. Let's see. And all this is happening very quickly, but we as software engineers are always trying to find ways to optimize this. No one likes it, back in the olden days when it took like solid minutes or more to load up a web page. And because everything's happening so much quicker now, we actually have a lot more control, and there's a lot more things happening under the hood, but things are a lot quicker. So a lot of stuff is happening every time you just load up Facebook. But we are going to start learning about what those things are. All right. There we go. So this is kind of the more raw version of the response request cycle. So let's take a look at the step-by-step of what occurs behind the scenes when our user or the client makes a request to look at a friend's photo. Okay. So a request is made by the client, so the user. I'm logged in. I want to look at Corey's picture. So I tell Facebook I want to look at Corey's picture. Cool. Next up, a type of request is defined by the HTTP verb for the request, and there's a bunch of these verbs that we're going to go over for this particular session. We're just going to be dealing with GET requests, but here's a couple that those are the most common. A GET request, and what this is a lot of them, most of these are kind of once you learn them, it kind of opens up to how the internet's actually working. But when you just go to a web page, if you just go to google.com, if you just go to facebook.com, all you're doing is sending a GET request, which is saying, I just want information. I want information from Facebook. I'm saying, okay, I open up Facebook. I want to look at Corey's picture. It's like, okay, cool. Here's Corey's picture. There you go. That's the whole response request cycle that happened there. A post request is if I need to send some sort of data. Let's say I wanted to add my own picture to Facebook and I wanted to upload it. So things like uploading, commenting, tweeting, all that sort of stuff is sending post requests to your API, to your server. And that is basically the process of adding information to a database. So I want to add my picture, I send a post request, and I get a response, which is actually just whatever, either the picture or some error or something like that. That's what we're going to get from our database. The put or patch requests, these are pretty much the same thing. There's slight differences, but essentially this is something that you want to edit. So this is saying I uploaded the wrong picture, or I uploaded you can't edit tweets. Let's say you could edit, you can edit Facebook posts. So let's say I make a Facebook post with 42 grammatical errors in it. I need to update that. So what I would do, according to Facebook, is I'm sending a patch request with all my updated, with all the updated text that I'm fixing for this thing. So I'm sending a patch request, which patching it is usually the easiest one to say, oh, I'm going to patch it. So I'm going to kind of fix it. The put doesn't really line up with our vernacular as well, but patching is kind of like, okay, I'm going to fix this up, and everything in the database stays the same. All the stuff on the API, we're updating it, and then it is saved into the database. And you can probably figure out sending a delete request is saying, hey, I want to delete that text comment. I want to delete that image. These are the most common HTTP verbs. You may see other ones like options, and options is probably the only other one, but these are the main 4.5 that you will see. Cool. So back into the response cycle. So the server receives and processes the request. So once we send any information with whatever verb, which is usually, when in the case of the actual just browsing the internet, is actually upper 90% just GET requests. It's just like if I'm going through photos if I'm like scrolling through Reddit, those are all GET requests until I add a comment or I add a post itself. So most of the internet is purely GET and post, and mostly just GET requests. So we're going to send something, we're going to get the server is going to process the request, and then some communication between the database will occur based on the type. So if I am the server, I'm going to get I'm going to get a couple things in my request. I'm going to get one, the verb. So I'm as a server, I'll be like, okay, it's GET request. So I'll take whatever and show what I need to show. If I get a post, I can be like, okay, what am I adding to the database? All right, cool. Let's add that to the database, send something back. And then kind of the same for patch. Oh, this is what you want me to update. Cool. Patch it up and a delete. Okay, that's gone. And then I can send back whatever I want. Usually just like some empty thing or like, yeah, you deleted it. Cool. So some moving right on, and then that response is sent back to the client. So that is kind of basically how the internet works. Everything's happening very, very quickly, but at its raw form, we're just sending our response, our query over to the server. It's doing whatever it needs to do on the server or database, and then we're getting a response back. And that is, in a nutshell, that's just how the internet works. And yeah, the user only sees the design part happening, and we don't actually see. The only time the user notices there's something happening on the back end or the server is when your web page is taking really long to load. Cool. So moving right along. So how exactly do we do this? So now we're going to so everything up till now has been mostly focused on just general internet, general how the internet works, general coding. So notice how up until now, I haven't said anything about JavaScript or Ruby or Python or Java or whatever up until now. Now we are going to get in how does JavaScript actually communicate with an API. And so let's get into it. So what it's going to use is, there's a couple ways to do this, but this is the way we are going to focus on. This is called the fetch function. So fetch is a built-in JavaScript function that can be used to make a request. Okay. So what's going to happen is, what we need to do is we need to find an endpoint. So think of this just as normally as sending a request, just going to a new site. Fetch is going to that endpoint. So whatever we put in, if I put google.com, then it would go to google.com, it would send whatever request, and then it would get a response back. And that's all well and good, but what we are going to be dealing with is a little more raw data, because when I send a request to google.com, my response is actually all of this. So it's actually an HTML doc. It's actually a bunch of HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. So I'm actually getting multiple things. But what we are going to kind of focus on is some APIs that just when you send the response, when you send the request, the response is just going to be what's called a JSON, is going to be JSON. And JSON is JavaScript object notation. Basically, all it is, it's a giant, it's a large JavaScript object with all the data that I've received from the database. And it's basically giving it in a way that any language can process it. Well, every language has some form of object with like a key and value pair. Every language has some form of object like that. So being able to send a request and getting a response as JSON means that any language can process it.
Phil, look, we have one question. It says, how is fetch different than get?
Oh, yeah. So fetch is just JavaScript's way of sending a request. Get is just a a type of just a HTTP verb to send the request. When it comes to fetch, once we get into this, the default is a GET request, and once we get into actually like coding along, you'll notice I won't actually say, hey, do a GET with an E. with an E. Well, no git, no git this time. And how is it pronounced? Get or git. Yeah, I will probably say them about the same, but in this case, I'll always be talking about GET for like a GET request. But so this is what we are going to do. We are going to send a request, and in this case, we are going to get our response from our database or our API. In this case, with we're going to deal with some cat facts. And what we're also going to do is learn how the fetch is actually, how it functions in JavaScript and how we need to handle some of its response. Cool. I know I see some here. So fetch is a type of get function, kind of the other way around. Like fetch can do get, post, patch, delete, put. There's all four of them. How to send parameters. Yeah, we are going to get to that. And then is a JavaScript function that sends a request. Yep. Yes. GIT is for version control. That's stuff like GitHub, stuff like that. For this is get. I think I say them differently, but I also don't know. I may say them exactly the same. Cool. So the data, yeah. So once we get our JSON response, this is something that we need to understand, and this is how we are going to pull that data from the API. When I say database API, they're in this case, they're pretty synonymous. Getting the data from the API and then in a way that we, the developers, the software engineer, the front-end engineer, can process it and display it to our users. So let's let me check the chat before we go into this. We are going to now we're going to get into actually doing some of this. So if you want the I'll just, for some reason I can't post to everybody, so I will just do that.
Let me see if I can fix that for you. Apologies.
Yeah, I put it in
Got it.
back too. Okay, cool. So this is where we are going to start. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, I don't know why I can't get everybody. Oh, now I can. Anyways, doesn't really matter. So this is where we're going to start. This will be in Code Sandbox. And this is what I've got up here. So let's go through the deliverables on here, and then we'll go into the actual thing. So this is what we're going to do. Attach a click event to this get random fact button. So over on the right here, we have just some HTML that we've made. So we've got real straightforward, just just some of the normal stuff in here. We're bringing in this index.js. So this index.js, this JavaScript file, will be all the functionality that we are going to add to this HTML page. So this without JavaScript is just static. So remember, this is another thing. HTML without JavaScript is static or does not move. It's just like a piece of paper. Can't do anything to it. Once we add in JavaScript, then we're able to add events functionality. We're able to go. We're able to make this static HTML page more dynamic and actually able to do stuff. So let's take a look at our. Let's finish this out. Let's finish out these deliverables. When the button is clicked, what we're going to do is make a request to our third-party API for a random fact using this URL. So if I go to this fact that's right here, I just have yours may not look as pretty here. I just have a JSON viewer. If you're curious, just called JSON viewer. Oh wait, unless it's the other one. Yeah, it's just JSON viewer. And basically you'll see that we get, when I go to catfact.ninja.fact/fact, I get an object, and I can tell it's an object because of these curly braces right here. and that we get key and value pairs. So a key of fact gives me a value of an adult lion's roar can be heard up to 5 miles away. And I also get a length, which we don't really care about. The only thing we are going to care about is this fact right here. So if I refresh the page, or if I send another request, basically refreshing is sending that same request to the catfact.ninja, I get a different one. So every time we click the button, it's going to send a request to this endpoint, which is catfact/ninja/fact. And then we are going to pull out this string right here and use that to display inside of this this random fact square right here. So back into the HTML. So this is the script. So we're bringing in the index HTML. I don't have to worry about this background image, just fun thing. The two things we care about is number one, we have this button right here. So first things we're going to need to do that's already been done on the JS is we need to find this button. So this get random fact button right here doesn't do anything right now because we haven't done anything in the index.js. And we also are going to need this random fact div, which is this square right here. And if we go into
you enlarge the text, they're having.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Let's do that. All right, can everyone see? I got one more. Cool. So this is what we are going to do. All right, let's get, and then update the DOM to render a random fact response from the request inside. And then there's the code that we already put. So onto code sandbox. Here we go. Let's see. So first off, I just want to show you the other thing that with this API and kind of the way that you know when it comes to dealing with external APIs, this is kind of my process, and it's kind of more general. The first thing I want to do is just get familiar with the API. I want to know how it works. If I send a request to this endpoint, this is what I'm going to get as a response. And it's important because depending on the response from that endpoint, the data you get from the API may be structured differently. So for example, if I just go to /fact, so https://catfact, then I get one single object with this fact. Cool. But if I go to /facts, I can actually get a list of all the facts. So just with one letter difference, I'm getting a much different piece of information. And the thing you'll notice, I don't have just, one fact right here. I actually still just have a giant object. So this is still JSON. And if this was an array, it would also still be JSON because in JavaScript, arrays are objects. But everything I would have is actually inside this data. Then I'd have to go inside here. So finding the data would be slightly different just if I went to a different endpoint. So even though it's simply one character or one letter, the difference in the code that I would have to write could be drastic. And that is important. I want to make sure when you're going into a new API, the first thing you want to do really is read their documentation. Obviously for this one, there's not much. It's just a fact, facts, and then I can get breeds. Then you can get something slightly more, a more complex documentation. This is a Poke API. I will throw this in the chat as well. What this one is slightly more complex, but it has all the same, it functions the same, just kind of with better, more documentation. If I go to this endpoint right here, and if I put in here, let me get, let's go down to the Pokemon. So if I go to just, this URL right here, there we go. And if I go ID 1, so notice it says, okay, if I go to pokeapi.co/API/v2, that just means they're on version 2, /ability. And if I put in the name or ID and, if I just have oh, I want the Pokemon. This is what I want. So if I go to Pokemon, and I only know the first 50 IDs. So if I go to Pokemon/1, I'm going to get Bulbasaur somewhere in there. Somewhere in here. There we are. Right there. It wasn't at the top. Cool. Our endpoints. All right. So I got a question from the chat. Are endpoints unidentifiable via the page's source code if not included in the API documentation? Pretty much always through the API documentation. You'll also notice that some APIs, if they're good and well curated. So for this, you saw there was a bunch, like this is all the different types of, and this is all the endpoints we have just for this Poke API. It actually, sometimes they give you URLs, so I can just go straight to that. And now I'm at the ability of ID 65. So whatever that one is, I don't even know. And even got it in a bunch of different languages too. RESTful APIs, yes. So what a RESTful API means is, so you'll kind of know that you can build an API however you want to. You can have the data come back any way you'd like. What a RESTful API means, and the Catfax won't have it, but the Poke API is RESTful. And the reason it is it's set up, basically RESTful is set up in a way that we've generally, as software engineers, have generally decided this is how we want it to go. And that's saying, okay, if we have in our database, so think of our database, I have a list of Pokemon, I have a list of abilities in the database. Here, I'll send a recent link.
Phil, they're asking about the size again. They say that it's too small.
Oh yeah, I'm on a new page. There you go. Yeah, so when we go to so for RESTful APIs, it's kind of a general convention that all engineers have mutually decided on that makes the most sense. So that's saying, okay, we want to do, I have a list of Pokemon and a list of abilities. If I wanted to look at an ability of, Pokemon of ID 1, that's saying basically the way you've got it set up here. I want to go to Pokemon/ID of 1, or just 1 here. I don't have to put ID equals 1. It just knows that. Obviously, this one's a little more complex because you can actually put the name in too. And if I wanted to go to the abilities, it would be abilities/1 or abilities/7, something like that. And it goes for all of the verbs. So for any GET request, if I want to look at all the Pokemon, I just need to go to /Pokemon or /Pokemons. But I think Pokemon's the plural, so it's fine. And then if I want to go to see one Pokemon, that would be Pokemon/ID. So Pokemon/1 will show me everything about Bulbasaur. If I wanted to add a new Pokemon, that means I'm sending a post request to just /Pokemon. And this is where the RESTful thing comes into play. I know because I'm adding a new Pokemon, that means that I am sending a post request to /Pokemon. If I change it, if on the API they say, if you want to change that up, you need to send it to somewhere else, that means it's no longer a RESTful API. It may still have RESTful things in it, but it's no longer a RESTful API. And for patch, we would go to, send the patch request to ID Pokemon/ID of whatever, and delete would go to Pokemon/ID. And that's kind of so basically it's kind of a way that we've all mutually, I wasn't there to decide it, but we've all kind of mutually decided this is what generally the simplest way for software engineers to interpret just kind of a general API. Are APIs secure? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. The ones that, if they don't require authorization, which none of these do, probably less secure. Basically, I wouldn't recommend sending any I wouldn't recommend sending any real data. Like let's say you were dealing with like an API that had like I don't know, like addresses for something. I don't know. What you want to do when you're developing stuff is we actually use fake data a lot. So let's say we have so let's say we have a list of addresses and we want to add a new address, and it's like, don't add your own address. What you want to do is make fake data, and there's tons of ways to do that. There is Faker. This is the Faker. This is the Faker JavaScript one, and this will basically do. It just makes any amount of fake data, and we use this a lot. So fake data. Oh, where's the last one? Makaroo. This is another good one too. You can make an entire API with 0% real data, right from Chrome. But then you get some APIs that are way more secure. And these are like things, any cloud storage APIs that you may deal with. There's a lot more authorization that's involved. And still, I wouldn't say they're completely secure. Basically, if you don't have control over it, then it may not be secure. Shortcuts for engineers. Sometimes yes, sometimes the opposite of shortcuts. Cool. All right. Let's I guess any more questions before we get into actual coding? All right. Cool. All right, let's see. So in our HTML, I do not want to upgrade, go away. So in our HTML, these are all the things we have. The things we care about are, I can do this. How long to take? 15 weeks. I'm just kidding. 15 weeks at Flatiron, and then tons of time afterwards learning, continuing learning. All right. So into the HTML, the only two things that we are going to care about are this button and this this little white box here. So into our JS file, things that we've started with here is the first thing we got here is we used a query selector, and we found our random button. So that's what this was called here. So inside this, we have a button with ID of random button spelled this way. So that's what is happening here. Document, this is the whole document itself. With query selector, so document, it's going to search the page for, and if it has the hashtag here, that means it's looking for an ID of random button. We could also, if you want to do this a different way, button, let's comment this out, button equals document dot get element by ID. We could do basically the same thing, random dash bttn, and it will be basically the same thing. Let's clear that. So if I'm down here, over here, I've got my, this is the actual, code, this is the actual website. Down here in the bottom here, I have a console log, so I can actually check my button there. So if I do bttn, oh, it's the console. There we go. So I can actually do it here. I'll just console log bttn. Or if I refresh, no, I don't want to refresh. There we go. So once this loads up, it'll tell me that I found my button. Maybe there it is. Cool. All right. The next thing we're going to want to do is we're going to need to add an event listener on it. And what this is going to do is it's basically kind of doing what it says. It's going to listen for a certain event. And there's tons of events in JavaScript. Basically, any event is any user interaction with a DOM element. So with an HTML element. So in our case, what we care about is the click event. So there's tons of events. There's click, there's change, there's mouse over, there's mouse out, there's, key up. So pressing something, key down, you can look, there's tons of them here. So let's say JavaScript, if I can spell it correctly, events. And these are all inside here. I think at the bottom, they have all the main ones here. So here's kind of the main ones there. JavaScript events, all. Give me all of them. There's tons of events. Where is events are fired? Cool. And basically it's just everything. It's just adding a listener to a certain HTML element with saying, hey, wait until there's a click. So in here, wait until someone clicks here, and then we're going to do this handle click function. So if a user clicks on it, then we are going to do this handle click function. And that's what we're going to build down here. So if I just do console.log, and if I do clicked, and if it refreshes, I never know if it refreshes in Code Sandbox. So now if I click this button, I get clicked down here. Here, let me do this. There we go. I get clicked down here in my console. So I could click this a billion times. You can see it's kind of going up there. There we go. So that means that my click handler here is working. It's not doing much, but it's working. And honestly, I still do this process like the whole time. This console log clicked doesn't go away. Like you'll see it. Like if you open up the console on certain web pages, sometimes you can still see it if you click something. But so now we know that our event is anything we put inside of this function handle click will get fired off every time we do the click itself. So what do we actually want this thing to do? What we want it to do. So every time we click the button, this will happen. Cool. So now what do we want to do? Every time we click the button, we actually want to send our request to this catfax ninja thing. Oh, it's .ninja. It's a cool URL. So every time when we click this button, we want to send a request to the API and then use the response to populate. What is that called? That white box. That's what I'll do for right now. So this is what we want this whole thing to do. So when we click this button, so that's this, and this, we want to send a request to the API and then use the response to populate the white box. So what are we going to do here? What we need to do now is actually send our request. And does everyone remember, how do we send a request in JavaScript? Yeah, we need to fetch. So what we're going to need to do is, I'm just going to get rid of that. There we go. I won't use semicolons. You don't have to. Some people do. I don't. So just letting you guys know. I'm gonna get rid of this. So what we wanted, I'll just comment it out. So once we click it, this will happen. So how do I send a request? So what we're going to need to do is fetch. We need to fetch. You'll notice I'm getting some nice IntelliSense things that's telling me what I want to do. So if I just fetch to our endpoint, and I'm actually just going to make a variable for this instead. So const, I will call this cat URL, and I'll just grab this bit right here. So I want to fetch to my cat URL. And for right now, I'm just going to console.log this fetch right here. So that saves, cool. So all I'm doing right now, it'll say it's clicked, cool. And then I'm going to console log whatever this fetch cat URL is going to give me. So what am I expecting to see? What am I expecting to see from this console log here? I'll call this in the fetch. There we go. No camel case for cat URL. For like URLs and constants, I usually just do all caps. But yeah, it doesn't really matter. All right, so let's refresh this page. What am I supposed to, what do you guys think we're gonna get in this console log right here? So obviously we're gonna get the clicked right there. What are we expecting to get from this fetch? What are we expecting this fetch to return? The facts. Cool. All right, so if I click this, oh, I actually don't. Obviously, I get the clicked right here. I'm getting something called a promise, and it's pending. So this is where it gets a little tricky, and this is there's a reason for this. So we don't actually just get, the fact just yet, because what we're doing is we're sending the request out to our catfacts API. But the thing about fetching or dealing with external data is the fact that we don't know how long this is going to take. If I send the request out, it could be, a couple milliseconds, or I actually don't even know how fast this is. But we're sending the request out. We need to make sure and wait for that fetch to resolve. We're sending a request, and it's not going to be instant, right? It's back into the restaurant example. You don't order your food and then it's instantly done. Thank you. You don't order your food and then it's instantly done. You order your food and then they've got to cook it. They've got to make it in the back. And then once it's ready, then they bring it back. So this is what's happening here. And this is what's called a promise. Well, basically, we send a request out to the cat API. The cat API says, I got it, we're working on it, and it'll get back to you when it's ready. And yeah, so that's what we're going to need to do. So now, instead of just console logging our the fetch right here, what we need to do is have some sort of chain that's waiting for this promise to resolve. And this is how we do that in JavaScript. And I'm going to get rid of this. Actually, I'll just do fetch. Let's try to not erase. There we go. So what we do in JavaScript is we actually can chain stuff on with a .then. So it kind of reads really similar, just kind of reads kind of normally. So I want to fetch to this, and then when I get the response, I'm going to do this. So, and then I take what's called a callback function. So I take the response from the database, and inside of here, I'm going to console.log. I'm going to do res response. Cool. So now I'm getting, okay, I'm sending the request to the cat URL. And then once that promise is resolved, I am going to console log that response. Okay. So this now, what are we expecting for this console log to say? What are we expecting this console log to look like? All right, yeah, let's check it out. So let me make sure this is refreshed. So I've sent the request. I am now waiting for that request to complete and then just console logging the response. So if I just do that, I get a response object in here. So again, this is a good response. So the things to note here is we have the URL that I sent it to. I have the status 200, which is a good thing, and okay, which is saying, okay, it was a good response. And now, but I still don't actually have I don't have that fact yet. Well, that fact actually lives under this JSON. It actually lives in the body. And I don't even know if I can get directly to it, but it lives inside of the body here. And we're now we need to use JavaScript to pull out all the data from this response object. So this is that response object. So now what we're going to need to do, we're going to need to utilize this JSON function right here. And what's going to happen now is we're going to do, instead of this, we need to do one more thing. We need to take that response.json. And what this is going to do is it's going to take that response and it's going to parse it into JSON. It's going to take that response, which was a good response, but then we're going to change it into JSON. And JSON, again, is JavaScript object notation. So it is basically the actual object. What we're trying to get is just this simple object right here from our API. So you'll notice another thing here. So if I bring back that console log and I bring that response.json, cool, got a bunch of parentheses, but that's fine. So it's the waiter, I would choose the, yeah. So as the waiter, you are formulating the response. You're formulating the request to the kitchen. So you're saying, okay, whatever the customer said, you're like, okay, they may have said like an entire novel worth of things, but you're like, okay, cheeseburger. That's what the waiter's doing. It's interpreting what the user is doing. The user's all over the place. I'm pointing at everything. Maybe they didn't even talk, and they're like, okay, cheeseburger, fries, kitchen. The kitchen's like, okay, I've got this list, cheeseburger, fries. I need to cook it. I need to cook it. I need to process it. I need to put everything. Obviously tacos too. And then once that's done, that's parsing it to JSON. So parsing it to JSON is kind of like, okay, it's done, and now we're plating it. Okay, and then after that, this is where we're at now. So we parse it to JSON. Now the waiter's bringing it back, and it is perfectly done. So if we just console log the response.json here, we get another promise. So parsing something to JSON in JavaScript is another promise. So what we're going to need to do is chain one more .then, and this is very common. This is how it works in JavaScript. So we're going to need one more .then. Let's get rid of this. Actually, let's do that. Let's kind of build it above and then take it out below. Okay, cool. Got a correct amount of parentheses. Awesome. So now here we are at the cat fact itself. Fact object. So now from here, we've parsed that response to JSON. We're waiting for the parsing to complete, and then the return is what's happening here. So remember, for the .thens, each of these returns are what's happening inside here. So if now I console log, don't have my shortcut. So console.log, my cat fact object, like this, I should get, now if I hit this, I get the cat fact. Oh, didn't mean to do that. I should actually get the cat fact from the database right here. So I've got all of this. So all these three lines, and this middle line right here, this kind of middleware is pretty much boilerplate for every JSON request that you're going to make to your API. So if you need to, get a response and parse it to JSON, again, there are other data formats, but we are generally going to be dealing with just regular JSON. This little line of code, you'll pretty much always need. So you need to send that request, change, once that response is back, we need to change it to JSON. And then after that, this is everything that we now have control over. So I can console log the cat fact object. And now I need to pluck out this fact right here. And the way I can do that is inside of here in an object, if I know the key, and the key right here is the fact here. If I know that key, I can just use bracket notation. And then that fact as a string, I will now just get that one fact in my console. So let's try it out. You'll notice there was a bit of a pause there, right? You'll notice there was a bit of a pause, and that is because the fetch takes longer than just console logging a click. So if I put another console log right here, waiting. If I put another console log right here, I will actually hit this waiting before the actual response from the database, even though it is technically below this fetch right here. All right, let's see. And then from here, let's take a look. The cat fact object, no, I am defining that. That is just, so this response and this response right here, I can name this anything I want. Same with this. Cool cat. Yeah, so this right here, anything that it is a response object. That's what you should probably name it: response, resp, res. I usually do res or response. It doesn't matter as long as it matches. These right here are just defining an argument, which is the response. This means it's whatever the return of this fetch was, which was that promise. Once it's resolved, then we get the response object that we are now parsing to JSON. So we got a cool cat fact, console logging that, cool. So now we need to take this value right here, which is simply just a string, and put it inside of this white box. So we need to take the cool cat facts and put it on the page. Cool. So what we're going to need to do, we're going to need to find this element. So back into our index HTML, we need to find it. So we have it's right here. So this is what we're going to look for. It will be slightly different. So now in this case, we just have a class. This div, blank white box, has a class of random fact div. So I'm just going to grab that right there. And then down in our fetch, we could do it up top here if we wanted to. But I'm just going to do it down here because we actually don't need it anywhere else. I need to first find the white box. And for this, let's say const white box equals document.querySelector. Query selector. And in this case, we want to look for a class. And in JavaScript, and we're going to look for this right here, this random random fact div. But because it was a class, remember here we had the class, we need to add a dot or a period right in front of it. So remember I want to do this, a dot before the query selector means search the DOM for a class with that name, and then a hashtag or a ID. So that's what we're going to do right here. And let's see, white box. Oh, I don't care. We're going to do it. So now what we want to do is first we found it. And the next thing we need to do is replace, there's just some white space here. All we need to do is take the text from the facts and put it inside of this div. So we're going to take that white box. There is a HTML, there's a JavaScript thing called text content. So we're going to add our own text to it. And what we want to add is this cool cat fact. So we'll just take that right there, put that in right there. And now we should, let's do that, clear that. When I click this, I get it. It doesn't look pretty because I think it's zoomed in a lot, but I can see it right there. So now we've tied everything together. We have our button that has an event listener that when we click it, it sends a fetch request to our catfax URL, takes that response once it's done processing it, parses it to JSON. Once that is done, we take that ending result, which is just this little bit right here. We pluck out that fact right there, and we put that string, that cool cat bracket fact, into our white box or our random fact div container right here. So a lot of stuff happened. Obviously, we kind of went through how the entire internet works, but this is kind of how it works in JavaScript. And it's, anything we put inside here, if we wanted to add anything else tied to this event, we put it inside here. Anything else we add here, it will happen. We could change the background. We could change the text on the get random fact. We could do whatever we want. But yeah, this is kind of the basics of dealing with APIs in JavaScript. Especially the more JavaScripty elements are dealing with the add event listeners and stuff like that, and obviously all the syntax. Cool. I guess any questions?
Yeah, now would be a great time for people to ask any questions about the presentation.
Yeah, and if I missed any, just kind of re-ask them there. Yeah, I can scroll to the bottom.
Just to remind everybody, we are going to be sending out a recording of this event within the next 3 business days, along with the slides that were used and links to the page.
All these up here. Let's see. Yeah. No questions. Yeah, I mean let's see. It's a different method for fetch other than using the then. Yes, there is. In the newer versions of JavaScript, we have something that's called, where should I put this? I'll put it right here. So in the newer version of JavaScript, we have something called async await. So what is actually happening, this fetch function, as well as the JSON right here, these are called asynchronous functions. So what that means is essentially what's happening. I'm sending the request, and that's the reason why I hit this waiting right here before all of this stuff. It's because it's kind of a background process. So I'm saying, all right, I'm gonna send that request. Everything else, go ahead. And then once this is done, it's gonna do the then and the then. So it's kind of like off in its own tree. So if you think if we had like 10 console logs in a row, and then in the middle we had a fetch, it would be like console log, branch off, console log, and then that fetch would finish whenever it's done. What we can do in newer versions of JavaScript, I think it's in ES6, we can turn a asynchronous function into a synchronous function. So the way we do that, and I'm going to kind of change some stuff up here. So function, asynchronous function of, and I like doing it with arrow notation. Now do it this way. So async function we'll call it handle click async. All right. So what this has done inside of here. So if I add just do async, it's going to yell at me, well, I can't use the handle click. So now inside of here, this basically turns my entire function to an async function. What that does is it gives us the keyword, the new keyword await that waits for the async function to resolve, then just waits for the async function to resolve. So what that means is similar to the dot then is what we would have. We would say, okay, that fetch that we're going to have. So we're going to fetch to that cat URL. And we need to assign it to a variable. So const response equals await that fetch URL. So we're going to await that fetch, essentially that dot then, and that will make a response. So now we have access to the response variable. It'll be the same as when I was console logging the stuff. And then let's say I wanted to parsed JSON. I want to await that response dot JSON right here. So now this parsed JSON, or what did I call it here? This would be that cool cat fact right here. That cool cat fact would be right there. And now I could, if I console log my cool cat facts right here. This may not work in Code Sandbox just because of versioning, but let's find we're about to find out. So if I just do that in here, I guess it worked. So inside of here, I now have that cool cat facts. You can see that it's here. Cool. I just want to make sure I'm still in the right one. There we go, right there. So now I can use that cat fact the same way I did this. So I would do that and that.
Looks like we have a couple more questions in the chat now.
All right, a little more detail on how the DOM works. I can go a little bit into that. Basically, it's a document object model. So think of it like the HTML. These are all the building blocks to a web page. So for us, we have one div that's holding all the things. Then we have this div with the box here, and another div that's holding this button. So these are all the things that are on the page. And as JavaScript, what we are doing is utilizing those DOM elements to manipulate the DOM itself. So I'm using this button to manipulate this other element here. How do you change the text that appears in the white box, like color and size and everything? Yes, that would be kind of the CSS. I think it's because it's zoomed in a lot. Yeah, there we go. So because we were zoomed in a lot, it didn't fit. It wasn't made to be zoomed in. But yeah, so that's why that doesn't work. Let's see. Axios works basically the same as this fetch, and I think it can essentially work the same. It is basically the same as just a regular fetch. It may have it's just like slightly different syntax, but the end result is pretty much the same. Yeah, so in JavaScript you have fetch. You can also just make like a HTTP request. I think it's just I've never used HTTP request JavaScript. You can make an XML request. So Ajax. You've got these are just like a HTTP request, XML. Oh, there's that GET method. If you ever see this $sign like this means it's a jQuery thing, and it's kind of old school JavaScript. So we don't really use that anymore, especially once you get to React, you won't need to do that as much. There's that fetch, yeah. And then Axios at the bottom here. Yeah, it's all basically the same. It just changes how you use, just how the syntax is. Let's see. Let's go back here. Do you ever do a mock interview of how the actual job interview would go for the front end? Have I ever done one? Or it's just so for a front end like interview, what they would normally, I mean, there's tons of different ways that companies will interview. You know, some all the way from just pure like data science and algorithms, like here's a problem, try to solve it, to but with front end, usually what they'll want you to do is build out some front end, build out like a single page application that does X, Y, and Z. So you know, in this example, if this was a mock interview, the interview would say, hey, I want you to build a single page application that when I push a random fact button, it populates a random fact on the page. And then they would obviously look at how you set everything up. If you have to send a parameter in a post request, so you can actually send data in with a GET request. So what's happening automatically is when we have a fetch, I wonder if it's going to pop up here. So so inside of the fetch, there's actually a optional second parameter. And inside of here, this is called a request initialization. And this is basically where you would put any other thing. So inside here, if we had like our method, it's a GET request. But if we wanted to send a post request, it could be post, or it could be patch, or it could be put, or it could be delete, or it could be head, or it could be options. But for us, it would just be a GET. No, that's not what I want. The next thing that would happen here is what's called headers. And headers are, I don't want to go too deep into it. It's just kind of like what to expect. So we're expecting our content type to be application, to be JSON. The application is not important. The thing that's important is just saying I'm sending a GET request and I'm expecting it to be JSON. And then if we needed to send information, we would have what's called the body inside here, and we'd have some sort of form data that we'd send here. We obviously don't have anything there, but get all this right here. This is the default. This is the if you don't throw an object in here, it'll naturally say I'm going to send a GET request with application JSON. Cool. And then that is that. And yeah, I think that is about it. Let me double check that I didn't break it there. Cool, still works. Oh, it didn't even, it's in the wrong one anyways. Here, I'm gonna make a new button. Make it a little cleaner. Random button, call this async. Random button facts. And then we'll just do that async. So now here that button async, button async. So now they'll both do the same thing, but one of them is slightly different. Yeah, did I break it? All right. Let's see. Was there anything else? Async and a button async. Yeah, this may not work. Just trying to be cool. Oh, it was working. Cool. But yeah, that is about all I've got. Line 26 is from 26. So, but yeah, thank you guys so much for coming, and this has been a lot of fun. Hope you learned something. And yeah, thank you for having me.
Phil, if you want to drop any of your like social handles in
Oh
there,
yeah.
LinkedIn or anything, if anybody wants to reach out, thank you
Yeah.
again for hosting tonight. We really
No
appreciate it.
problem.
Thanks for everybody that zoomed in. If you have any further questions about Flatiron, I dropped a link in there for our events page along with our YouTube page for any prior videos that you want to watch. We will also be sending out a recording of this event along with any materials used in it within the next 3 business days. Thank you guys for coming and have an amazing night.
There you go. Yeah, thank you.
And then Phil just dropped his LinkedIn information in the chat.
Yep.
Oh, we got some people starting their cohort on Monday. Yay! Thanks for coming, y'all. We're excited. Have a good night, you guys. Bye.
Bye.